Hello and welcome to The Society with Barrister Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. Nearly 1 in 3 women at some point or the other has been subjected to violence in her lifetime. Having said that, we also understand the fact that neither is gender-based violence a new issue, nor is it a country-specific one, which is why when we talk about gender-based violence as it does exist in the Pakistani society, we need to delve on its root causes. And this is exactly what we'll be doing in our today's show. We'll be talking not only about the root causes of gender-based violence in Pakistan, we'll also be talking about the progressive laws which actually punish perpetrators of violence and provide justice to those who complain that they have been, subjected to violence. Furthermore, we'll also be shedding light on the fact that what responsibility, if any, rests on the society as well as media, especially when it comes to protecting survivors is concerned. Having said that, in an attempt to actually raise a public awareness and in line with the global 16 days activism against gender-based violence, we'll also be talking about what reform moreover is needed when we talk about curbing this social menace in our society today. And to do that, let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Barrister Mehrunisa Sajjad, who is a legal expert. Assalamu alaikum, Barrister Sahib, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. My second panelist for the show today is Ms. Saima Murtaza, who is an advocacy and communications expert. Assalamu alaikum, Saima, and welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum, Fatma. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. And my third panelist for the show today is Ms. Valerie Khan, who is a gender and child protection expert. Assalamu alaikum, Valerie, and welcome to the show.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you so much.
Madam, I would like to start the show with you. Just like I mentioned earlier in my introduction as well, that there are reports which suggest that nearly 1 in every 3 women is subjected to violence at some point or the other in her lifetime. And we generally see that whereas, our attitudes towards violence, they might vary in different societies, in different cultures, in different jurisdictions. What do you feel are the common causes for the same?
Well, I think that all over the world, what we certainly see is that the societal structure, the institutions, and the overall socio-cultural environment is largely framed by men for men. And basically this lack of women representation translated into a lack of gender sensitivity is damaging the prevention and the response to deal with violence. And secondly, that feeds into basically a patriarchal societal setup rather than a gender equality one or a system based on parity. So I think that's a global issue. And until and unless we don't realize that we need to shift the pattern to a more participatory, inclusive society, which sees dialogue and mutual respect as an option and a solution whenever there are disagreements of different views and opinions, and that violence can never be neither tolerated, neither an option, then we'll start seeing a change.
Right, madam. But to this, I would also want to add the fact that, I think one thing which also contributes to violence is, perhaps the socio-economic status of the woman too, because we do see reasons of violence, reasons because of which women are subjected to violence varying in different socio-economic classes. So would you agree with that?
I think it's certainly a denominator and a common denominator for sure. However, we still need to remember that while there is the socioeconomic inequalities and socioeconomic vulnerabilities certainly increase the risk of facing violence. Right. Violence is still targeting all socioeconomic strata. That is something that we need to remember.
Right, madam, your point is noted. Mehrunisa, would you want to add something to that? Because I know as a lawyer, you come across so many cases on an everyday basis where you see women being subjected to violence, be it in the form of acid attacks, be it in the form of, domestic violence, even honor killings for that matter. So would you agree with what she has said?
Yes, I agree with her. And just to add to that, I would like to say that one of the main problems, I think the root cause in all of these cases is a common denominator, and that is where in our society we think that a woman only deserves her rights or agency or freedom if she is in conformity with what the men in her life expect her to do.
Right.
The moment she transgresses or kind of oversteps those outlines which they draw for her, then they think now we have the right to subject her to any kind of treatment.
Right. I think this is something what, Madam also earlier covered, basically, that you have to conform to that, typical stereotype, and you have to conform to the societal norms and culture, else you are more likely to be subjected to violence. But moving on, from you, we would also like to get the legal narrative, because we all understand that Pakistan is one of those countries which is over-legislated, and the recent developments in the laws, they are also very promising and progressive too, at least on paper. So, tell us about the laws which have been promulgated to actually protect the rights of women who complain that they are being subjected to violence.
So there is the domestic violence law, obviously. Then there is the PPC, actually. The Pakistan Penal Code has a wide kind of range of protections offered to and criminalizes behavior, honor killings, swara and vani, where women or minors are given as compensation in lieu of disputes or murder, etc. Forced marriages are prohibited. Practices like marrying a girl to the Holy Quran, that is prohibited. Even forced abortions or miscarriages are prohibited by the PPC.
And what about, violence which takes form in online spaces?
We have PICA, Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, which also kind of serves to deter blackmailing, women receiving inappropriate content online, being subjected to threats, cyber-stalking.
Meronisa, we can't actually bifurcate and see these separately. A lot of times we see a connection between the two. A lot of times people stalk, women, harass them online, and then it also leads to further violence when they meet them in person. In real too, basically. But do you feel as a lawyer that the penalties being imposed, they are adequate or they should be more stringent?
I don't. I think the penalties that exist in the law right now are, someone, for example, who is subjecting a woman to violence or sexual violence or mental violence of any sort, psychological violence, can face anywhere up to 3 months to 25 years of time in prison. But obviously, depending on the circumstances of each case, it's not about, I think, inflicting harsher punishments. There are punishments in the law. I think what needs to happen, we'll talk about this, is more enforcement and implementation of existing law.
Your point is noted. I will come back to you on this, but coming to you, Saima, I think a very important point which she mentioned, on which I would want you to deliberate, is the fact that, we need to work on implementation of these laws. And implementation would only come if we as a society take laws seriously and we abide by them. So what kind of, societal attitudes do you see generally as a social activist in Pakistan when it comes to complying with all these laws?
First of all, when she was talking about the violences, we generally do not know what type of violences are existing. So the awareness and the spread about what type of violences are existing should be one of the focal thing which we need to spread widely. And secondly, I think the way you started the program, you said that 1 out of 3 women faces the violence, but I think we women every day faces violence in some way, in some form. We don't know what type of violences exist. When joined the organization, I came to know that the women violences are of these ABC categories. Like stalking, cyber stalking is one of the violence. Even forced marriages, child marriage is one of the violence. Even
emotional abuse or economic abuse, as per our laws, that amounts to violence.
Yes, even intimate partner and the amount of emotional or financial or verbal violence is also verbal communication. Loud verbal communication is also violence. So basically, we do not know what type of violences are existing. Awareness plays a very important role, and institution strengthening is very important in this part as well. And awareness starts from your home, actually. So the parental, the elderly awareness from your parents plays a very important role. And as we're having more than 65% of bulge of youth existing in our society, and if they're not being directed towards the right direction, it's going to be a disaster in the end.
So you also believe, when we say that we have to not normalize violence, we have to condemn it as, for what it is, rather than just brushing it under the carpet. This awareness, this cognizance, this education needs to come from the household, and then of course traveling to the education system, and it's a continuous process that we all go through, on which I'll come to you, madam. I would want you to address the fact that, when we talk about having this kind of, complacency towards so many crimes which have been recently taking place, especially against women and children in Pakistan, what role do you feel media has to play when we talk about changing our societal attitude attitudes when we talk about, inculcating this culture of accountability and moving on from accepting violence for what it is?
Well, you see, from what I've seen, there are two things. The media's role is to highlight in order to be the whistleblower and to denounce this type of violence. But what we see is that usually it's actually, whenever there are cases of violence, it is reported in a very insensitive manner at the cost of the safety and dignity of the victims, sometimes in blatant contradiction with the law. For example, we are not supposed to divulge the identity of a victim of a rape unless the court has allowed it, and with the agreement of the guardian. And additionally, when you look at, drama or production, there is a glorification of violence against women in particular, and especially within the four walls of the domestic sphere. I mean, the role and the societal role of women in general and girls that are portrayed on media and through drama is extremely abusive, regressive, and does not match with what we expect from, a prosperous and healthy and open Pakistan for the 21st century. The definition and the model of masculinity that is portrayed and promoted, as you say, is a very negative and toxic one. I mean, we also have men who are empathic, who have feelings, who are not abusive, who do not believe that the relationship lies on power, but rather on mutual respect and participation, and that needs to be the kind of model that are encouraged and put forward.
Right, madam, your point is noted. But coming to you, Barrister Sahiba, I think a very important thing which Valerie has raised, on which I would want you to deliberate further, is the fact that we need to inculcate this sense of responsibility when it comes to reporting of such cases, especially when they are sub judice, or especially where the consent of the person who's being reported and who has been a victim of the crime is not taken. So what do the PEMRA guidelines say about this?
So they actually say that you need the consent of either the victim or the victim's guardian before giving away their identity. And it also actually, another thing that's a broader issue is that when the media, obviously to increase their ratings or to create this hyper sensationalism around cases, when they start doing that, number one, you are actually trying the person in a kangaroo court of public opinion.
Right.
So there is a trial already, a parallel trial taking place. Everyone has opinions about it. And the second problem is that the moment that something happens and the media is there and they are reporting live that this is the incident, the location of the incident, there's a lot of tampering and problems in evidence collection.
So other than these guidelines, what laws has this current government passed when it comes to protecting rights of women and children, especially those who are subjected to violence?
So I think there have been two extremely progressive pieces of legislation that have come from this government. One was the amendment made to the rape, the definition of rape in the PPC. This has been widened now. It's in gender neutral terms. So transgenders and men can also be victims of rape, sexual violence. And then secondly, in terms of the act of rape itself, the definition has been widened to include a penetration of or by other body parts, not just genitalia. So this actually brings our Pakistani law in alignment with international definitions of rape. And then the second piece of legislation is the Anti-Rape Investigation and Trial Ordinance of 2021, which I think is phenomenal in terms of how progressive our legislation has become.
Of course, because we did have laws before which addressed the offence of rape, but the fact that now we are going to have speedy trials.
And this is more victim-centric.
It is more victim-centric, exactly. And the penalties have been made more stringent. You have a responsibility to do the medical legal within 6 hours, I believe.
And this ordinance actually says that every public hospital should set up anti-rape crisis cells over there. So a victim of rape actually has a one-stop shop. She goes to this crisis center. Over there, she can the FIR can be registered over there. Medical legal staff with trained staff will be there to collect evidence. and independent service providers will also be there. So, I mean, they're ISPs, either a lawyer or a doctor, a psychologist or a social worker, who will then also accompany the victim to court, trials, etc. So to make the process less daunting.
Makes it easier for the victim to go and to access justice at the end of the day, because I think this is a problem with, you know, which you would agree with me on, that access to justice in itself is a big issue. And earlier we used to have, I remember, violence against women centers in Multan too, that way. So I think this is a step forward in that way, and we should acknowledge the government.
And you know, Fatma, another very important thing in this ordinance is that any evidence which is proving the immoral character of a victim is now inadmissible. So I think this is a huge leap also in terms of changing social attitudes, that just because someone has consented to an activity before, or you know, doesn't mean that it,
or they, you know, whatever that is, we've had court judgments to that effect who would say that, you know, a woman's character is devoid and should not be just, you know, seen in terms of the commission of the offense itself, because it has no bearing that way. But coming to you, Saima, I think a very important aspect which we must, you know, get your narrative on is the fact that when we talk about violence, we should also consider it from the health perspective. And you, I know, are working on this for quite some time. So tell us about the nature of your work, and how do you, you know, medically take care of those women who come to you complaining that they have been subjected to violence?
Fatma, the organization I'm working with is like existing in Pakistan for more than like 70 years plus. And they have a huge network across Pakistan. And in 2010, there was this flood in southern Punjab. And we, at that time, you know that whenever there is a natural disaster, even during the pandemic, any sort of natural disaster, the rate and the spike of the gender-based violence spike goes high for that. So for that reason, we have our mobile units, camps over there. We have our counselors working with us. We have our mental and doctors available on the spot. We do the capacity building, prayer educators working with us.
And then I think the best thing is that you're also mobilizing young people out there
the peer
to
educators.
actually, to act as volunteers too.
And a very good interesting thing is that we did a project with WHO, which was a referral pathway, that any victim who is been affected by any sort of violence, what pathway shall she approach to, which department shall be involved, and what will be the role of every department to be involved. We did a capacity building, strengthening on this part. Other than that, we have been working with Kushali Bank on microfinancing women like these who have been
So basically, whereas you are taking part of the health concerns as well, you are working towards, you know, economically empowering women too, because we can't just see this one thing in isolation. We have to consider it in its entire context, because as we all understand, it does has its root cause in lack of women, you know, in basically women not being socially and economically empowered.
And one thing, Fatma, I want to add is that youth is the biggest bulge of 65% of youth bulge we are having in Pakistan. We have the biggest youth network working with us. We have 61 youth resource centers who are working with us on educating the youth regarding gender-based violence, life skill-based education, regarding youth empowerment, regarding women empowerment. So we have the 6 toll-free helplines which are 24/7 working on counseling on such issues like this. So we have a lot of network, not only working for family planning, reproductive health, right, but we are focusing on gender-based violence as well, because violence can be through anything.
Of course, and I think in this regard, it's equally important that we also talk about your work and its scope when it comes to family planning, because, you know, that is another facet of violence. We see young girls being married, and then, of course, them being more vulnerable to violence as opposed to those girls who delay their marriages. So how does this all work? How are you working to educate, you know, Pakistani masses, especially women in the rural areas and their families, to actually say no to child marriage? Because you see, the connection is very clear. You stop girl brides and you know, decrease their vulnerability to violence.
Child brides means you're bringing an end to a childhood and bringing an end to their education. Luckily, we were the one, we brought the law and we did lobbying and advocacy against Child Marriage Act in Sindh, and we changed the age from 16 to 18. Other than that, we do advocacy, we do lobbying, we involve different stakeholders, media campaigns, capacity building, because child marriage, and we have noticed that child marriage is one of the violence which is causing mental as well as physical, as well as a lot of other violences which are causing a lot of even the Child Marriage Act causes death of women because their reproductive body is
and
not
I think
mechanism.
here it's also fair that we talk about boys who are underage, who are married into, basically who are married as children, because it's just not the girls, it's also the boys. A lot of times we see young boys being married off below the minimum legal age, on which I would like to take you on board, Ms. Valerie. I understand that as a gender and child protection expert, you've also been working on the institution of family, nurturing families, working with evolving mothers, and helping children communicate better with their mothers. So how do you feel does this work, and how do you feel empowering the family institution will help us curb violence in the society?
Well, it's crucial basically, because when you focus on the family, and in the context of Pakistan, it's quite easy because this is one of your fundamental I would say societal unit. You basically focus on making a happy and healthy family. That's what we've been focusing upon, and that's an idea and a concept that people, regardless of the level of education, can connect with. It's also part of your Islamic values or whatever anthropological framework basically. But what happens is that we basically have been, the organization I've been collaborating with have been focusing on healthy and positive parenting, where we try to make parents understand what is their responsibilities as an adult, and what is the difference between an adult and a child, which is also a main issue. We tend to forget that as parents, our role is to protect and provide for the children, and that we have a fundamental responsibility to keep them away from any form of abuse, any form of harm, and that nothing can justify that. So the family planning, for example, is one example of parental responsibility. You need to plan your family to make sure that you will be able to fulfill your responsibilities. In addition to this, you cannot ask children to raise children. Child marriage means, in the context of our society in Pakistan, that you will get pregnant very early and that you will have further children. These are associated with 50% more chances of having stillborn children, of having maternal health complication for the mother, of having anemia, of having abusive behaviors, because a child is not prepared to take upon the responsibility of raising a family. So when you explain and give tangible example like that.
That's very rightly put by you, but I also think that, like you yourself said, that education is very important and you need to work with families. I still feel that we need to, economically empower families too, because at the end of the day, Valerie, this is a socio-economic problem. A lot of parents, I see them getting their children married off at an age which legally they shouldn't be getting married off, just because they can't afford to keep their children at home. To which I think I would want you to add on, because the law is very clear on this. The law lays down a basic age, and I think Sindh is the only province that way, which says that the minimum age for both boys and girls should be 18 years. What do the other provinces say?
So Sindh actually passed a piece of legislation which said that the minimum age for marriage for boys and for girls is 18 years. So a law of a similar nature has yet to be passed in Punjab, in KPK and in Balochistan, but I think Sindh has been, at the forefront of passing this piece of legislation. But I think you were talking about socio-economic empowerment of families before. I'd just like to add something there. And this is that when we talk about access to justice, the most important thing is also, till we are empowering women economically, we are not facilitating their access to justice. And the reason for this is, if a woman is married and if her husband is subjecting her to domestic violence or sexual violence, if she has nowhere else to go, her parents are not, if they're of, a conservative nature, they're not going to support her to go and launch a complaint against her husband. They don't want her to get divorced or break her family up. Where does she go? So a lot of the times cases go unreported, and sort of the perpetrators of this violence
are scot-free, basically, that way.
Yeah.
Which is why I keep on repeating that, we just don't need to see the laws on this. There's no doubt to the fact that, of course, the laws have been there for quite some time now. We need to see this problem in the larger socio-economic context as well. And then a lot of times we also see that sometimes women, young girls willingly get into such marriages just because they don't want to stay at home with their parents. It's that notion of marriage. So many social factors come into play when we talk about eradicating advocating child marriage, on which I would want you to add, because I understand that you've also been doing these very interesting and informative awareness kind of sessions where you've been educating not only young girls, boys, but also their families about, how child marriages adversely affect them and their health.
Fatma, ironically, we are living in a society, as mentioned before, that we are literally living in a society which is male dominating. And the wings of a women are clipped, and we are behind the curtains. If anything like violence, any domestic violence or a related violence regarding your partner happens, you should have a hush-hush situation.
Right, Simon. I think I would also want you to deliberate on the fact that when we talk about child marriages, a lot of times we see that it is the families of the young girls who force them to get married. So are you also working on family counseling to curb this social menace?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, that we have the biggest youth network and we have more than 61 youth network centers in our panel, and more than 6 youth helplines, field true helplines, where we provide counseling. And we train the youth, and we call them prayer educators, and they go in different societies. They have different community sessions where they educate them that what type of what is the right age for marriage. There should be a reproductive mechanism in everybody's body. We should know that a woman's body is not being prepared at the age of 16 or at the age of 14 plus. Ironically, there's the social taboos, the cultural taboos, the different diversified sort of taboos that we are living in, and people think that a woman, if a girl gets married, at the age of 15 or 18, she's protected, she's given shelter, but we have to flip the card as well. How well she can take
care of herself
and the
but
violences.
Then we also need to see that how poor is a family, whether they can afford to keep her or not, because a lot of times we see this issue surfacing in families who feel that they would prefer to get their daughter married off because they can't afford to send her to school or they can't afford to keep her at home. So again, I keep on repeating, this is a socio-economic problem, and when we talk about curbing violence as an issue, we need to keep all these factors in mind.
We do different sort of social media campaigns. We are very loud. We are aggressively during even the COVID pandemic, when these sort of gender-based violences were being raised, or the spike was on the rise. We had a lot of campaigns against child marriage. We had a lot of awareness campaigns regarding gender-based violence, and what is the education is important for a woman, for a girl, because it's not going to empower a woman, but it's going to have an empower society as well, and it's going to give a good raise to the economic as well as human indicators.
Right, and as they say, you educate a man, but you educate a man, and if you educate a woman, you educate
a family.
Right, Saima, your point is noted, on which I would want you to comment as well, Valerie, because I do understand that you've also been very actively lobbying and advocating in basically bringing about all these laws which we have today when it comes to child marriage. So tell us, how easy or difficult was this whole process?
Well, it is obviously a very difficult process to generate a change, a mindset change, and that's not specific to Pakistan. Anywhere else in the world, people are not comfortable with not only changing, but also, looking at their wrongdoing in the mirror. But I must say, I think that in the last decade, and especially in the last 3 years, there has been a willingness to address violence against women and violence against children in particular, violence against girls and boys in particular. And there has been not only progressive legislation such as the enactment of Juvenile and Enforcement of Juvenile Justice System Act, or ICT Child Protection Act, or recently, as mentioned earlier, the law against rape. But I think it's also been an overall state willingness to challenge the status quo. The support services to prevent and respond to violence against children. And that includes, I agree with you, ESSA's program or other initiatives to have some safety and economic safety nets for those families. But again, this is an intergenerational process, and in that sense, ensuring that awareness and pro-gender equality and child conducive narrative is actually included. What we call life skills based education are included into the curriculum we've been working on, the government has been working on lately, is crucial. We need to change the mindset and teach non-violent, equality-based, decency-based narrative from early childhood. because then it's too bad and it's too late, or far more difficult. The momentum has been unprecedented, I repeat, so far as Pakistan is concerned. And Pakistan has had several examples of good practices that have been praised internationally by the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Children, such as the establishment of child court or GBV courts, as well as capacity building with the judiciary. So I guess, despite all the challenges, there is hope, and I think we are on the right track.
Right, Madam, to which I would also want to add to the fact that I was going through this report which suggested that since 2014 till date, the number of cases which has come forward, especially when it comes to acid burn crimes, that has drastically reduced too. So, there are so many positive things that we do need to talk about when it comes to addressing violence, and we just don't need to focus on the negativities of the crime per se, but we also, like you earlier pointed out, need to delve on the positive social developments.
Fatma, we should also give a thumbs up to social media. Progressively, they are also promoting something positive out as well. And the way they have been progressively supporting the gender-based violence in a positive way is also creating a lot of confidence in people who are, keeping themselves behind the curtains. And the way my organization, something it's so amazingly done, like the organization where I'm working in, because there are a lot of youth involved. There's a huge network. The way the youth is passionate, the way the youth is committed to teach other youth and to counsel other. They don't care which community they are going into. As my organization is totally linked to working with 80% of the vulnerable and the marginalized society, and they are the most victimized society in the committee.
Right, and I think in this regard, it's equally important that when we talk about all these issues, we also educate men about the concept of consent, because this is one issue which we keep on, seeing, which emerges again and again. But coming towards you, Mehrun, and coming towards the conclusion of the show, I think it's very important that when we talk about this issue, we must also, talk about the fact that what is the way forward, what reform, if any, is needed both at the policy as well as the institutional level.
So I think there's a lot of institutional reform which is already underway. We have legislation pointing in that we set up gender-based violence courts. So we are adopting a more victim-centric approach.
Right.
We are also, changes made to the law also say that police officers or any investigation officer who is negligent in investigating such crimes will also be punished.
This is under the anti-rape law.
Yes, it is. So I think there is a lot of reform that's happening. One thing that I will talk about, I think, which they can be more of, is some sort of transitional housing facility available to women. Actually, the new domestic violence bill introduced by this government for Islamabad, which is still pending, recognizes the importance of transitional housing and enables judges to pass interim residential orders, etc. for victims, because one of the main reasons that victims put up with abuse or violence is because they have nowhere else to go. And then adding to that, I think, while all of this institutional reform is underway, we have gender-based violence courts, we are realizing the importance of investigation officers. We are also, the 2021 ordinance punishes investigation officers who don't investigate such crimes properly. I think institutions should also take a more proactive role in creating awareness.
And I think also in this regard, perhaps better coordination when we talk about law enforcement, because that is something which will really help, especially when it comes to preventing crimes. Right, Mehrun, your point is noted. But coming towards you and coming towards the conclusion of the show, I think we've at length discussed the various social developments. We've also deliberated upon the various laws as they do exist in the society to curb violence. But what are the changes that we need to make at our own end, especially when we talk about societal attitudes such that, we end up not victim blaming, rather we end up shaming the perpetrator?
Fatma, we need to follow the laws existing in other Islamic countries. There are strict laws. Like even if there's a theft being done, they cut their hands publicly. So if there's a perpetrator who has done a crime, or a victim who has been victimized because of that, he should be hanged publicly. Some few of these acts, if they take place, the other people will get scared accordingly.
Right.
And these things will stop to some percentage, not to some percentage, but I think it will stop to a very
to a great percentage. And having said that, I think we also need to publicize when it comes to awareness. Society's responsibility. The media needs to play a very active and proactive role, rather, to publicize success stories of women who have actually gotten justice, because I feel the narrative is now quite negative. So it needs to be more positive in order to encourage more women to come forward. I think a very important question which we must raise in this context is the fact that, we've at length discussed all the positive social developments, the laws too, but what responsibility do you feel rests on the society at large when we talk about curbing violence? And when I talk about the society, I mean in terms of the societal attitudes.
Societal attitude, Fatma, I would like to add this thing that first thing the laws needs to be enforced, and there should be a proper implementation of the laws, and publicly it should be mentioned that if somebody has committed a violence, or the victim who has been has faced the violence, this is what's going to happen to the predator, what he's going to face in the end of it. It should be publicly mentioned through social media, or through the media should create awareness. We do have different sort of dramas supporting other sort of violences against women, but there is no such TV dramas or no such programs regarding the laws which can help them favor.
Exactly.
First, we need to focus on that. Secondly, there should be a major issue of violence is not just gender-based violence, it's gender disparity. We do not have equality of gender in other institutional systems as well, which includes the government, the police stations, the hospitals. So it creates confidence among the women to come and talk openly.
So basically, at the end of the day, I think repeating the same thing again and again, that if we want to counter gender inequality, then this is something which needs to be addressed in the wider social economic context, and also in all facets and all affairs of life. On which, Valerie, I would like to come to you, and coming towards the conclusion of the show, why do you feel is it important for us to have more women in leadership roles, be it women politicians, be it women in the judiciary, be it women, as police officers, if you want to ensure that, we cut out violence at the very grassroots level?
Well, I think because contrary to what one of the participants has actually stated, I do not believe, along with many other women, that having harsh punishment and inhumane punishment are actually going to solve the problems of violence. I think it's going to rather perpetuate the cycle of violence. What we have seen is that, first of all, in the context of Pakistan, one of the main deterrent effects is first to break the rule of silence. And for that, in order for women to report and to access justice, we need to have women interfaces. And that's why women in the police system, women in the hospital, women in support services are very important. Secondly, when you do not have women in the courts or as prosecutors or as lawyers, you again see only a male perspective, which cannot, understand as well as a woman the dimension, the impact of, for example, what sexual violence is for a woman. So ensuring that women increase representation in the justice sector occurs is actually a guarantee to have a fairer and more gender sensitive court decision. And by that, you're going to have more appropriate, jurisprudence, and therefore the deterrent effect will come from that. Again, I will repeat what we said initially, rather than the severity, it is the certainty of the punishment which matters. And lastly, we've seen that when women are part of the decision-making processes, whether it is the law-making process or the political making process, they do focus on bringing around more humanistic and developmental focused approaches. I'm not saying that men cannot do it, but women are particularly active in this sector. And that is a matter of ensuring a balanced, more, a fairer view and fairer access to justice. And again, the last word is victims. Children, women are asking to have female interlocutors when they are facing these dimensions. So we need to listen to them.
Right, madam, your point is noted, and I think it's equally important that when we talk about, facilitating women, especially their access to the justice system, they would generally feel more comfortable approaching women that way as opposed to men. So I would agree with you on that. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you so much, Barrister Saiba, and thank you so much, Ms. Saima, for being here with us today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about violence, especially gender-based violence as it does exist in the Pakistani society today. The issues that we do need to work on is effective law enforcement, the need to have more inclusive approaches, and of course the very pressing need to believe survivors of violence. We need to tell them the very basic fact that just because they have been subjected to violence, this is not because of a fault of their own. They must not blame and shame themselves, rather they should move on. We need to empower such individuals, and we need to tell them that they can be the hero of their own stories. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.